Good afternoon, and welcome to A Gathering Place brought to you by the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. And this is Marilyn Hemingway, and we have some special guests today. And we're going to be talking about politics after the death of George Floyd, and where do we go from here? And I'm going to bring in Mr. Brandon Upson, political strategist. Good afternoon, Brandon. Good to see you.
Hey Marilyn, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing good. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. It was a little bit of last minute reach out to you because I've been busy this week and we all have been. But we're going to get into that. But let's go ahead and bring in Jamar. Hey, Jamar, how are you?
Hey y'all, I'm good. I'm yet holding on, as the Saints say.
That's
And
good. That's
so,
good.
we making it.
We've all been extremely busy, and I was just telling Brandon, thank you for hopping on. It was a last minute invitation. We're going
hmm
to really get into it, but we all have been busy. So my first question I wanted to ask us is, how are we doing after the murder of George Floyd? How are you guys? What have you been up to? How has it impacted you? And Brandon, I'll let you start. Anything you want us to know? What you've been up to? How's this impacted you?
Yeah, of course, been busy. A lot of the folks that I've been working with over the last couple of years have been organizing protests across the South. I've had some conversations with folks organizing in Alabama, Mobile, in Atlanta, in Tennessee, all over North Carolina, and then we've had some big ones here in Columbia and Charleston. But overall, it's been exhausting. Um,
I can relate.
spiritually, yeah, spiritually
Yeah.
exhausting, mentally, even physically with the marching. It's just for a while I was just numb, and I was yet again disappointed. But I was given a little bit of hope and energy when I start seeing how much movement became or came out of this situation. I was sharing with another group that when President Obama got elected, we start saying that now our community, our black folks in America, can see how high we can rise, and there's nothing stopping us from going up higher. And we all saw that our aspirations, we could be the most powerful person in the world if we wanted to. But then seeing George Floyd on that ground, having a life squeezed out of him, eventually calling for his mother, showed us that we could still be that person laying on the ground, filmed in public with an audience, having a life choked out of you just because you're a black man in America. And living in those two worlds at the exact same time is just the most exhausting thing that you could experience in life. And I don't think everyone understands it. Folks can try to empathize, they can be compassionate about it, but there's no way to fully understand and grasp how it feels to be a black man in America until you live as a black man in America. So that's where I am. That's where I am right
All
now.
right, very good. You said the word numb. One of the feelings I felt is numb at when I first heard about George Floyd, and I'm glad to realize I'm not the only one. Because what scared me about it is I had to question myself: am I becoming inoculated to the
Mm.
pain, to these incidences that happen time and time again? And so I'm glad to see I'm not the only one. I'm not numb anymore. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Jamar, your thoughts regarding what's going on with you, catching up with you?
I was trying to figure out where I'm supposed to start because it's for me. It's not just the George Floyd situation. Before that was Breonna Taylor. Before that was Ahmaud Arbery. Before that was Trayvon Martin and Philando Castile, and we can't even name them all. The list is
Yeah,
way too long for no
it's way too
reason. And
long.
so, for me, I think personally, Brandon hit the nail on the head when you talk about being exhausted, but not just numb. But for me, I felt frozen because
Mm,
I spoke at a convention this week, and I shared with them that you all may look at me as a well-spoken, well-to-do, educated black man, but that doesn't prevent me from dealing with racism. That doesn't prevent me from dealing with discrimination. and injustice, right? A college degree is not protecting me from that, and clearly is not protecting my brothers and sisters, especially from that work. And so for me, I felt a little frozen, but because of the leadership positions that I hold both at work and in my community, I had to get unfrozen pretty quickly. And so what we've seen here is that years upon years of anger and trauma be compounded. And that's why we see people that have moved to the streets, that are moving to city councils, that are moving to social media actions, which I know we'll dig a little bit into. But for me, that's what I've been supporting. I've been supporting people marching. I've been supporting people who've been fighting. I've been trying to push people to talk to their elected officials. I serve as president of the Black Austin Democrats. I also, on the other side, deal with elected officials and really trying to educate them and inform them on what our community is feeling, and that they need to have a pulse on what the community feels as they're thinking through what these policy decisions are, what these solutions are. And then obviously, I know in South Carolina, you all have an election coming up in July. We have an election in Texas coming up. And so for me, it's a frozen feeling, thinking. Now I'm trying to act myself, but also move both elected officials and the community to act. And I know we'll talk about that, but our community is in a state of sorrow. It's in a state of grief. But sadly, I think a lot of Black people weren't surprised. And they're not surprised by the result. And we shouldn't have to live like that. Like every time you see something on Twitter or Facebook or on MSNBC or wherever you get your news, you shouldn't even look like, oh, the white people done it again. We've got to move past that. And so there's some substantial work I know that all of us are going to do toward that. So,
Yeah, I kept thinking of the 5 stages of grief.
oh, yeah.
And it seems like we just can't get past maybe the first 2 stages. And I remember when my mother passed, how I could intellectually knew what I was going through, and it was my
Mm-hmm.
mother, and I have grown past that. Time doesn't necessarily heal it, but
Right.
there is, you move forward. But it seems in like so many ways our community, we're stuck at certain stages,
Yeah.
and it creates a mental health issue. And
Mm-hmm.
two, every time the next incident happens, the next murder happens, we can't go past that. And then plus, we are actually not allowed in this society. It's hard for us to grieve because we're told so many times to get over it. And I
Mm-hmm.
was in a meeting
Speak
this
on
week.
that.
This week has been all over the place for me on a personal level, but then also there was outreach to me to help plan a march. And so I got involved with that as an advisor. And when you say we get involved, and I know you guys notice, it's not just being an advisor, it was all in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all in. And there were different groups who wanted to protest, and we were asked by law enforcement, can you pull it all together? So everybody had a different vision, and we had more than one meltdown over this. So we were dealing with the emotion of George Floyd, but we were also dealing with the emotion of the history of where we live as a black community. But in Georgetown, where I live, we are the epicenter of the rice culture. And as a friend of mine who is a local historian and artist, etc., said, Georgetown is where they made the money, Charleston is where they spent the money.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And historically, and this impacts us to this day. So some folks were coming from, not only do we want to acknowledge George Floyd, we want to acknowledge the historical pain
Mm-hmm.
that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
So we had to bring that comes to a table, and that brings a different element to it. And I'm telling you, we had some meltdowns this week just for us to organize to have a march.
Can I say
And
something,
yeah, go ahead,
Marilyn?
Brandon.
What you're saying, I'm not a psychologist or any, I don't have any PhDs behind my name or in front, but I feel like at the most cellular level, we have generational PTSD and trauma that has crept its way into our DNA. And we haven't had, like you said, we haven't had the opportunity in history to address that trauma. And unknowingly, we've passed it on from generation to generation. So when situations like this come up, We have emotions and feelings that bubble up in us that we don't
Mhm.
even understand or where it's coming from. And in
Mhm.
situations like what you just explained, I can see where that bubbling up of those 400 plus years of trauma directed at our culture and our personhood, our being, could come up in a passionate time like that. And with everything we're fighting for today, we see it, and you can see my art behind me, the I am a man poster, the buffalo show soldier over my left shoulder here. Like, we've been fighting these same fights for generations without tangible solutions, and the folks who are out on the streets right now are fighting for those solutions to finally come to be. MLK stood on the steps of in DC and said there's a check that has been marked insufficient funds. And my grandmother used to say, and excuse me, don't write a check that your ass can't cash. Excuse my language. Quote my grandmother there. But
Go on, Grandma. Go ahead.
Right. Go ahead and say it now.
but realistically, there was a check that was written, and these young folks are marching in the streets to say, we've come to collect. And America needs to listen. While we are out here working, there's other folks working behind the scenes so that we can mark those checks and those promises good. And we're coming to get our money. You know, Rihanna made a song that was befitting for the time right now. You better have my money, and it better cash. Now, I'm getting off topic, but it's so much deeper. I'm making light of the situation, but it's so much deeper than what we see on the surface. This is cellular. This is from years and years of traumatic experiences that we haven't had the opportunity to overcome and to even understand and to deal with.
I actually don't think you're getting off topic because we have to understand the root of what we're going through so we can seek healing. And at the same time, we have to organize.
Mhm.
And it creates trauma because you're constantly trying to find that balance. And this week we had to get to the march. I mean, people were waiting. We were getting word. People were saying, if you don't do something, we're going to do something. And it wasn't coming from a productive place.
Mhm.
I understood where they were coming from, but we had to say, how do you take that energy so we could go and demand the reforms, so we could
Hmm.
demand the accountability without burning down some buildings, you know?
Mhm.
And on a personal level, I'm not having a problem with some of these buildings. I would not go as far. I have actually said, well, they have insurance, but I actually understand where it's coming from. And I know most people would not agree with me on that, but I understand where it's coming from, that hurt, that pain, the voiceless. And Martin Luther
Yeah.
King, y'all, I'm gonna paraphrase that. Riots are the voiceless speaking out,
Yeah.
and so I understood where that's coming from. But how do you capture that
Hmm.
energy so that you can demand reform, so you can demand accountability, direct it to a positive path rather than a constructive path, I should say,
Right.
directed to a constructive path rather than a destructive path, but doing it in a loving, acknowledging way. And I believe me, I had it out with some elected officials this week. I had it out with some other community leaders because I
Okay.
literally, they were like, who are they coming? Who are they?
Mhm.
People have forgot. You forget who you represent. I had
Hmm.
this. What's going on? It's because people have not been heard.
Right.
They've been yelling out for years, for decades, if not centuries. Listen to me. Look at what's going on. Get this solved. We need a solution. And this is what we're seeing. I know, Jamar, you want to say something because I see it. Go ahead and
It's
say it.
creeping up in my spirit, but I mean, I think a couple things to the last question because I didn't get to jump in, so I want to step back just a little bit. But one of the things that you said, Marilyn, right, is that we can't move past certain stages of grief. You can't move past something that you continue to experience over and over and over and over and over again. And we're talking about, every election we're told it's going to be better. Everybody comes and says we're going to change this and change that, and they don't change it. People say one thing and end up doing another, right? People end up fighting each other and going back and forth. So I think really as a community, why we feel this grief to a point where windows are broken and cars are on fire and business and potential businesses and corporations are destroyed is because ultimately you can't go through the 5 stages of grief if you're still going through the thing that caused the first stage of grief. And so I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, when this systemic racism and all these pieces stop, then we will be able to, as a community, begin to heal and be able to get to a place where we can be offering more solutions, moving that energy to, like you said, towards some substantial and some policy change. But one of the things I want to highlight about the rioting, and obviously there's, as you said, a lot of conversations back and forth. White people need to remember their history. I mean, if we go all the way back to when they got to the country, they rioted and looted the whole country. At the end of the day, they stole an entire country, and now they're worried about a target, right? And you go down to the Black Wall Street massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, because Black people were building their own businesses and building their own money, and white people didn't want them to have that. And so they were able to destroy those businesses for negative reasons to prevent Black people from building their own community and building wealth and building power in their own community. You can go to the 60s, to the Vietnam War. White people tore blank up, right, because they didn't want to go to war. And so, ultimately, at the end of the day, we're fighting back and forth, but they have to look at their own history. And a lot of these elected officials that are white have to really look at that history as riots are the voice of people who either feel unheard or want something to change and don't know any other way to make sure that those things get changed. And so that's what we're seeing across the country when it relates to these particular riots. Now, what you're talking about is how do we get to substantial change and do a lot of these pieces? Y'all been through my trainings. Y'all know I love a good training and a program. And what we teach are 3 things, right? You have to know your community organizing. You've got to be on the ground. You've got to be talking to people. You've got to be meeting people where they are. You've got to be answering the questions that they have, because that's why people don't feel like they're heard. Then you've got to move to the electoral politics space, right? That we need to make very clear that voting is not the solution, everybody. Voting is a key. Voting is a step. But voting is not the ultimate solution, right? But voting is our opportunity to put people in office that will be representative and reflective of our communities. And so we've got to pay attention to who's running. We've got to ask questions to the people who are running. And then there's the last piece that you talked about, Marilyn, is the policy, the public policy. What are the solutions? And so how do you connect the people to the decision makers to therefore get the policy? And that part right there is where we're missing, because people vote and they vote for people who don't end up doing anything. And so then the system and the problems get reinforced over and over and over again. And so we've got to make sure that all 3 of those pieces are working together, that the community is rooted in the election and is reflective of the election, but that the people that actually get elected are accountable to the community for the policy we need, so that we're not going through 5 stages of grief over Black men having knees on their necks.
For some reason, I can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear Marilyn.
She just talking. We still can't hear you, Marilyn.
No, but one of the things, and then I'll add on to just something that, like I said, I see that, people are talking. I'm looking at the chat now because we can bring some of that into the conversation. Thank you, Brittany. I appreciate you thinking for liking the way I think. And then starting on the local level makes a difference, because one of the things Jessica said is around the local elections. A lot of this isn't just at the president. This isn't at the White House. This is your city council, the people that go to your church, the people that are at your grocery store. And, we keep keying in the grocery store, but what are they doing for us?
Right.
And so, ultimately, at the end of the day, those are some of the pieces we have to look. You have to look at all 3 levels and how all 3 levels work together, that the local, state, and federal all build on each other. But right now, when we're talking about the police departments, we're talking about accountability and training and de-escalation. That happens at your city council. So when you're done with virtual church, or you're done at the grocery store, or whatever community event or virtual event you're at, make sure you know exactly who your local elected official, your city council member, your county council member, because those are the people that, ultimately are going to make the decisions when it comes to the police. I think we have Marilyn back.
Yeah, we do.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, go ahead. I don't know what happened, but go ahead, y'all rolling. So go ahead.
You know, Jamar can teach a whole course about this.
He
It's what
can.
he does. But ultimately, when we put all the pieces to this together, you see folks amplifying their voice, and I think eventually, it'll lead to us amplifying our vote so that we can amplify the solutions that we want to see. And I mentioned that the riots and the protests have their part, but we have to do the work behind the scenes to bring it together.
Yes.
A great
Yes.
example that I've seen up close is happening in Columbia, South Carolina, where a young activist by the name of Lawrence Nathaniel is organizing protests and rallies. While folks are out there in the streets, there's a group of folks working with him and the city government to implement the changes that they're asking for. Everyone in this movement has a role. And I think we talked about this the last time you did this, Marilyn, but we all have to be knowledgeable about what our specific role is in this, and be able to be good with the role that you have and do it to the best of your ability. If you are the person who can bake the cookies and bring them out to the march with some water to make sure people don't fall out, bake those cookies and bring that water. If you're the person who has a network of 5,000 people and you can galvanize them and get them to come somewhere, galvanize your people and bring them out. But if you are a person who understands policy, who understands or have this connections to sit down with these decision makers and get policy implemented, do that. But at the same time, we've elected people to do this work behind the scenes in legislation, in city council, county council, to do their jobs. We have to lean on them right now with continued pressure while these marches are still happening to make sure that they do their job. And if they don't show up right now, we have to show up at the polls and make sure someone else will. So
Hmm.
while we're doing all this, keep your eyes and ears open and keep your mouth, keep your voice amplified, because we have to identify who these leaders are, who we have to identify who we've elected and they're not working for us, so that we can change their seat when they come up for reelection. And many of them, these state reps, are up for election in November. So watch out for that.
That's so true, Brandon. I was noticing some folks this week in Georgetown who are potential leaders, and they have actually done stuff already, but they did it without the support of the community. And that's kind of a twofold thing going on here, is that they didn't have certain relationships to engage the community. And I'm speaking for Georgetown, but it's actually a good example. Then there are those in the community in positions of influence or elected positions that don't want to help. you
Right.
know we've got the wrong people elected, and we need to be honest about that. And even there was a meeting called where it excluded some of the people who were planning the march, and when I
Mm-hmm.
found out about it, I made sure that they were able to get there. And I got there before them, and I had to speak on their behalf before they got there, or they would have been left out of the conversation, because
Yeah.
quite frankly, some of our elected officials walked in there with no. They did not want things to happen, but things needed to happen because the outlet needed to be there for the initial grief and that emotion that was there. But you also need to start listening to your people.
Right.
And in this last 2 weeks, we see some people, whether people realize it or not. I've seen some leadership skills that are just, they need to get in the training. So Jamar, we
We
might need
need
to
you,
be talking.
Jamar.
Bring, thank you. We need you. We talking about that, Jamar. We gonna
Right.
need you. We might need to
Fix
move
it,
on
Lord.
that.
Fix it, Lord.
And the Lord will fix it.
So it's
I
like
got
we
I
need
got
it.
some clients coming, but what ended up happening is we had a group that formed from the youth and the young adults. I like to say, I've been saying the young people all week, because, well, that's a whole nother issue. I'm not young anymore, but anyway, but they formed a group called South Carolina Solid. It's a Facebook page right now,
Mm.
but they're gonna go make it legal. So they have plans. They're moving on with this, and to get now, the next step is really getting organized, really looking at those policies and issues that they want to sit down at the table with law enforcement with, and also some
Mm,
of our elected officials. And if they don't come up, if they don't step up to this moment, we are going to have to remove folks. And yeah,
Yeah.
the notice has been given. Notice
yes,
has been given. And if these folks don't take it seriously, well, we just gonna have to remove them. And they're very arrogant in thinking there isn't leadership out there. I even had an elected official say, you know how our people are ignorant. Well, if you say that, you're wrong. First of all, let me tell you, he was
come on,
wrong. We know
yes,
he's wrong. But why are the people ignorant? Why do you think you have the right to say that? It's because you have not done your job as an elected official to give them the information that they need, so they are
Correct.
not ignorant.
Facts.
And now you can have the damn nerve, excuse my language, my show, I can say that, to turn around and attack them.
hmm,
You're
Oh,
using it as a weapon against them when you didn't do what you were supposed to be doing.
exactly.
And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation, because the three of us can have this type of conversation, and I hope those of us who are watching us now take it back, because we're at the point. This is why we speak. We have the ability to speak and the freedom to speak, and I say that because a lot of us have jobs, and it kind of holds our tongues from speaking. I work for no one but myself. So I just have to please me, and move forward. So take these words and move forward with that. So I just want to throw that out there, and I know y'all got something to say about it, so go ahead and
Hey,
say it while I look at the
I,
comments. Go ahead.
I got something to say real quick because
Yes.
when you mentioned those elected officials, one of the issues that we're having right now, and I'm going to use a phrase that has become extremely taboo, Black Power. All right. So, Black political power, it in many of these places could help us create the change that we want to see, but it is not there because what we do have in some of these communities is directly linked to white power, right? And what I mean by that, you have Black elected officials who are in the position to do what we need to have done or influence the change that we seek, but they're afraid of the retribution of the white elected officials and white power base in those areas, right? So they won't get out and march with us. They won't speak up. They won't push that change in those backroom conversations because they're afraid that if they say the wrong thing, those white persons in their communities will pull the rug from out from under them. So in order for us to actually get this done, what you're seeing right now is the beginning of what I believe will be the Black political power base in our communities. When you said that South Carolina Solid has come together, my definition of political power is organized people plus organized money. So right now, those young persons and young professionals are organizing people. We can work out the organized money part. As long as they have a clear view and a strategic plan to where they're going, we can get that done. But we got to remove these people who are not willing to use their power to influence the change that we're seeking. All this other stuff with people saying ignorant stuff, we need to go ahead and have a long memory and remember that on election day. And if we don't have anybody to run against them in November, we need to start looking within these new groups that are formed to run them in 2021 or 2022 because they have to answer to this. I know Brittany was asking a question. I hope y'all saw it that I know Jamarr can answer. I'm going to stop speaking right now before I get out of hand.
Is it this one right here? Help me! I'm contacting elected officials. I'm versed in effective communications, but not with politicians. Give me some pointers, please. All right.
I can take a stab at not just the question, but what I wanted to add to what Brandon was saying, and also you, Marilyn, is around the elected officials. And let's talk about the Black power and Black elected officials. I mean, one of the things we have to stop and go all the way back, because earlier you were saying about the root. We need to elect people that know they're free, first of all. So,
Come on,
so we need
Juneteenth.
to start there. We need to stop electing people because they sat on the church deacon board or they were on the PTA, or they hold some position in the community.
Popular.
one of the things that we are learning now that position doesn't equal leadership skills. And so the problem is that we have a lot of Black people who serve in elected office who, one, they don't have the right mentality in terms of not knowing we're free, and then they don't have the leadership skills. And so coupled together, this is where we end up, where they're pointing the finger at other people because they've conditioned themselves to a system that says those people are not important and that those people are not relevant. And you have to be careful about people getting in office and getting a little bit too much money and power, because then they'll look, like you said, and turn on the people that are protesting, the people that are voting, the people that are asking for something to be different. And so I think ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what you have to deal with. And so we need to have more training. We need to have more resources. But that is also the most important part of our grassroots organizing. Because if you don't know something, that's why you organize the community. Because there's somebody in the community that knows the answer to that question, right? There's some grandma down the street, auntie up the road, uncle down the road, whoever. Somebody in that community knows what's going on. But to Brittany's question around engaging with elected officials and giving pointers, one of the things that I do around engaging elected officials, and y'all feel free to add in, is I am one of those people who hit people up in multiple modes. So if you get an email, you're going to get a phone call or vice versa. You're going to see me at the community meeting or the community event. Now, I mean, obviously a lot of things are virtual. You can contact people on social media. There's all kinds of ways, Brittany and all those that are watching, that you can contact people in their respective community. One of the things I think that's important to make sure that you lift up is, especially if you contact in somebody's district that you live in, you need to let them know your zip code and where you live. You may not put the physical address for security and safety reasons, but you need to let them know that you live in their district, that not only am I just a concerned citizen, I'm also a voter. And the thing that people don't realize as elected officials about voters are like the board of directors. They can hire and fire the directors, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to look at our power as voters in that aspect, that we can hire or fire who we want to represent us in the power structure of that community. And so I think that's something, let them know that you live in their district. Not only just sharing what's going on, but share your story. If you have a story, a personal narrative, or someone in your family or your household, you have a personal narrative that you can share with that respective elected official, that's something that's going to ultimately be very important in terms of this work, because people need to see, especially our elected officials need to see, what is the personal impact this is going to have on people that elected me to represent them. And facts and stats and figures are all great, but if somebody knows that the longtime NAACP leader is having an issue, that's a different kind of impact than just saying, here's a fact sheet. And so those are a couple ideas, I guess, that I have around how I engage with elected officials, how I train people and also teach people. And, happy that y'all have thoughts. So I know I've gone on and on, we could go on all day.
No, you're right on track.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not just what we're communicating with them, it's how we're communicating with them. And then making sure that there's a level of accountability behind what we communicate. And what elected officials have not felt is the accountability, because they've not done their jobs. Many of them, I won't say all, but many of them have not done their job, but they got reelected 5 times. So they think they're doing something. And so at some point, the community and the voters have to say, enough is enough. And if you won't move forward, we'll find somebody else who will.
Yes, Brandon, I know you were going to say
And
something.
many times they've gotten elected. No, and many times they've gotten elected without being challenged 5 times in a row, right? Yeah. But when Jamarr was talking, it made me think about when we got the Citizen Review Board in place in Aiken, South Carolina. There was a situation that took place that between the cops and a civilian, where we decided that, and when I say we, it was me and a couple other community members. We wanted to create a citizen review board, and how we went about doing it. Each one of us was connected to a different sector of the Aiken community. There was one, his mom was a city councilwoman. Another one, his family owned a business. I was out there in Tools Hill and all on the streets talking to those guys. I had a relationship there. And we all pulled that together and made an action plan for how we could move forward. But we connected with that ally who was a city councilwoman and asked her, what will it take from the outside to help you move this forward? And she worked with us and gave us an action plan, and we were able to do it. One of those things included basically a show of force. City council meetings in Aiken, normally, if you go in, there's only 2 to 3 people of color there. And when I say people of color, I mean any hue of pigment, right, or melanin. And we showed up with about 50 black men at that meeting, and think the ball got rolling fast. So these folks, especially when Jamarr says, let them know that you're in their district, they respond to the people who are going to vote for them because they don't want you to vote them out. That's how we hold them accountable. And that's just one way to get things done. But thank you for that, Jamarr.
I wanted to mention it before I forget this quote that I posted on Facebook. I'll mention this, and that until we elect people who love our communities more than they love access to power, we will continue to have systemic oppression and systemic racism because they're gonna put that access before us. And I say access because they really don't have power. The power is with the people. But we have been bamboozled for too long that we elect someone. And I actually was in a meeting this week, and someone said to the elected officials, when we don't want people to come back to you, the superiors. And that blew me away that she even described these people as superiors. They are not our superiors. They are public servants.
They work for
We
us.
elect them to serve the public. They work for us. And going back to what Jamarr was saying earlier with the outreach, calling them, sending emails, sending letters. I want to add to that, doing letters to the editors, to the newspapers. You could do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that speaks to consistency. If they see you out there, if they see the community out there consistently speaking up, whether you're showing up to city, county council meetings, for example, whether you're writing letters to the editors, whether you're writing letters to them directly or emails or making phone calls, they need to consistently hear from you. And I'm not saying that doing that every single day, every single week, but we're smart people. Spread it out.
Mm-hmm.
Increase your group that's working on this particular issue. For conversation's sake, you're working on a particular issue. Increase your outreach to other people and help them bear the load. One of the things that's come up in the last few years, postcards are so easy. You
Yeah.
could print them at home, write your personal note, slap that stamp on them, and send it. That's very impactful. Consistency is key, folks. Too many times we do the march or the walk, and there's no follow up. So
Mm-hmm.
yesterday at our March rally, when I went to speak about getting registered to vote, I actually told them, I'm not here to tell you to register to vote. What I'm here to tell you is to get educated, to get engaged, to show up at the city and county council meetings. Because what's going to come out of that is your desire to register and vote. And then, because voting gives you power, but knowledge makes you dangerous. And they
Mm-hmm.
don't want you to have knowledge. They don't want you to organize, because once you start that, you are a danger to their seat. They know that you could come and you're going to replace them eventually if they don't step up to the game. And so
Yeah,
I
that's
do see the movement, but one of the key things we need is that consistency.
yeah, and that's part of the process, Marilyn. I mean, that's part of why elected many, not just elected officials, but political parties too, work to, and that's another conversation, I'm sure, for another day. But working to keep people, in so many a lack of better words, ignorant to the knowledge that they need
Mhm.
to fight for their community. And so I think the one thing that's really important is what you talked about around the media. Is one of the things elected officials do not like, you all, is they do not like negative press and they do not like negative attention. And
Mhm.
so get to know, especially your Black media. I want to lift that up. Know your local community media. You don't have to always go to the big news outlets. Sometimes the small newspapers, they need content and they want to share those kind of things with the community. We have people of color that lead radio stations or that have radio shows, right? That if somebody can call into a show and say, look to the community, that there are different issues and different things going on, that radio station can reach multiple people that you can't just sitting at home. And so be thinking and being creative about the different outlets that you're using in those respects is also something that's really important. And we've got to use our community resources, because that's how you really build your base. When you really go to the black newspapers and the brown newspapers and the black and brown radio stations, and you buy ads and different things like that, especially in this virtual age, that's really going to be something that's going to be just dangerous ultimately at the end of the day, because in these elected seats, we need people that are from the community and of the community to be serving in those seats. And the problem with the access is that they get access for themselves. They don't use their position to get access for anybody else.
And with that, sometimes, and I want to share the benefit of having a meeting before the meeting. When you're pulling all your people together, have a meeting before you meet with that elected official, so that y'all have clear, points that you
Goals.
want. Yeah, clear goals. So much of what we're fighting for is basically quality of life issues. We want to be treated like first class citizens and have everything they're in. And you got to articulate that so they know exactly what you're asking for. And in this virtual age, we were just on a call where, some folks were voicing their grievances with a decision maker and didn't have a meeting before the meeting to have those clear goals set out. So virtual, set up a meeting with that decision maker or that elected official and bring all your people together. Now, in some cases, the more people you have on there as a show of force, the better and the more they'll listen to you. Because if you just show up with 3, 4, 5 people, they're like, okay, it's an isolated situation. It's just the 5 of them. But if you show up and you have 100 people on that call, now they'll start to listen to you and take you seriously.
Very true. Numbers do make a difference. Go ahead, Jamarr.
No, and I think not only numbers, to Brandon's point, I think it's how you use your numbers. I think it's always the key. And so one of the things I teach people in a lot of lobby meetings or sessions, whatever you want to call them, is make sure everybody has a role. I mean, there's somebody who's facilitating the meeting, right, who can articulate why we're there, what the goals of the meeting are, somebody who's taking notes, somebody who can tell a story, somebody who can speak to the issue and how it impacts people in their community and in their district. We don't want to just pull people together just to pull them together. We want to be strategic in how we leverage our stories and leverage our power together. And so I wanted to add that to everything Brandon said about the meeting before the meeting. And then you need to have a meeting after the meeting too. The one where you have, maybe you have some food at that one. But ultimately you need a meeting after the meeting because you need to debrief. You need to figure out what y'all's next steps are. And then also make sure, this is the part that people forget to, I think someone asked in the chat about consistency. Make sure, and I've worked for elected officials, make sure you follow up. The worst thing that can happen is that you can have a good meeting and then y'all never follow up and then nothing gets done. And then everybody's mad at that elected official, but they didn't have the information to follow up with that you promised that you would follow up with, or whatever the case might be. And so one of the things is that make sure that you're following up, because that part will be consistent, because they'll have to answer to you when you follow up, because you'll have specific requests and demands and information based on your conversation in the meeting. So just wanted to add that.
Very good. So Brandon, anything in particular that you've been working on this past 2 weeks? I know you kind of mentioned some stuff, but anything you want us to know for the last 2 weeks, what you've been working on?
Yeah, so I've been working with Jamarr. We're getting ready to launch a organization next week that we feel is part of the solution. Everything that everyone's marching for right now and making their voices heard. There's multiple ways to get to our destination. There's also multiple roles. Like I said, we all have to understand our part and our role in this. And we feel like part of our role could be the engagement, the registration, the education, and the mobilization of Black men specifically. When we look at what's happening across the South, when it comes to our electorate, our quality of life, our opportunity, and then the all the bounce checks that Black men are receiving. We think that bringing them together so we can amplify our voices is key. So the name of the organization, y'all will see more about this next week. It's called Amplify Action. And we are doing just that, focusing on mobilizing Black men as part of the solution. Because I feel personally, and this is my opinion, if you can organize one of the most targeted communities in America and teach them how to speak up and create the change that they want to see effectively, then you can help everyone rise up. And even though we're focusing on men, Black women have a key role in this because we can't, if one isn't right is rising and the other one isn't, it's only but so far they can go. We all have to rise together. So I'm excited about it. Jamarr has been integral in helping us shape this. You know, he is just a brilliant person, strategist, and tactician. So you'll learn more about it soon.
All right, very good. Well, whatever you guys need me to do, I'll be their support to help amplify it. Um,
Yes.
this is one reason I actually started this show is to talk to the change makers in the community. So, whatever you guys need me to do, just let me know, and I'll try to make it happen. Jamar, so what have you been up to? You actually started a new job recently.
Sure, yeah. And I didn't pay Brandon to say all those nice things about me. Okay, I just want
You don't
everybody
have
to know
to.
for the record. But in my community first, I serve as president of the Black Austin Democrats. So my job is really coordinating a lot of issues and mobilization actions, etc., in the Black community. And I was also just elected as vice chair of the Human Rights Commission. And so my council member appointed me to the commission, and I am working on those issues now every day. So I get to do both the community organizing and the policy work, right? And how, like I was saying earlier, and how that connects. But in my job that I actually get a check for, I am now the director of electoral programs at an organization called Repower. Those of you who've been in the progressive movement for a long time or any time will know that it was Wellstone Action, named after late Senator Paul Wellstone. But really, Repower is a national training organization that works on it cultivating the leadership of organizers, campaign practitioners, candidates, and eventually elected officials. And so all I do is figure out how to work with organizations and communities on how they can train their talent to either run campaigns or to run for office themselves. And so that's what I'm doing, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to inspire the leadership of other people to run for office, to serve on boards and commissions, etc., really to be able to do a lot of this critical and important work. But above that, all of that is what I have been reinforcing and reminding everybody at every speaking engagement. It is in any role that I serve in, I'm ultimately a Black man in this country. And so working to make sure that my Black people are better than they were before, and working towards some tangible solutions. And that's ultimately what I do. And that's the role I hold most dear, other than all the fancy roles that folks talk about.
Well,
We can't forget we Black, and before
yeah.
we were all these other titles, we were Black
Yeah.
people, and that's something we should be proud
Yeah,
of.
and I can say I knew Jamar when back in the day. You mentioned Wellstone, and you and I, we
Yeah, we went
were
to training together.
we went to a training together, and then we said we're going to bring Wellstone to South Carolina, and we
Mm-hmm.
did. We brought it to South Carolina, and those of you who not quite as aware of the progressive movement, Wellstone was a vital factor in the progressive movement in this nation,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
we were the organizers to bring the one and only training of Wellstone to the state of South Carolina. So, as I said, the Brandon with their repower and everything, just let me know anything that I can do.
Will
Which
do.
both of you are leading me to this point. One thing I've noticed, and I brought this up at our rally yesterday also, is folks getting educated on the basic construction of how government works. So
Mm.
many of us, we're out here, we're full of anger and we have action, but we don't know basic things about how government works. And one of the things I'm not ready to announce the name of it, but moving forward with two sisters, Black sisters, is a program that will educate about the Constitution. And I hope that it will grow and segue into other, the Declaration of Independence, how government works, getting really basic with it, because unfortunately we don't find civics and government in our school systems like we used to. And I'm finding folks who want to change government but don't understand the structure of government, don't understand how it works. And folks, that's really basic, and it hurts us because we don't know that we can go to the city council and we can speak during public comments. I mean, that's there for a reason, and it speaks for us to speak to our folks. So it's not only writing letters or emailing them. You have an opportunity during public comments to speak up and share your concerns of issues. So that's one of the things I am also working on, and that'll be happening very quickly, as a matter of fact, to get it up on, technology is our friend, to get it up on Facebook Live and other outlets, to just really get people educated to the point where they can go to a repower training. They could go to Amplify with Brandon and Jamarr. They've already got some basic stuff in place, and that's what I'm actually working on also. I know, Jamar, we got a hard end. We got 10 minutes here, so I just want to remind everybody that you are watching A Gathering Place, brought to you by the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce, with special guests with Brandon Upson and Jamarr Brown. So, Brandon, towards getting educated and really getting drilled down to our community, do you have any thoughts with folks regarding just a little bit more what they should know as they move forward in organizing?
Yeah. So I work with a lot of guys who have a very diverse background from the streets and to the suites, right? And there is a commonality between how we expect to be treated and how we work with each other, and how the work should look when it elevates to organizing. So if you operate in mutual respect and understand those conditions, bring that into the work. Communication is the key. Mutual respect is the key to making this happen. One of the biggest pieces of all of this that I want to make sure we leave here with, that when we have organizers working to do this work, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have different opinions or different ideas, but have that meeting before the meeting so you can square them away and respect each other so that we can do more work and amplify our message and our goals. Is it's not so much that I'm going to say, because I know Jamar can elaborate it better, that folks need to go somewhere to be trained. I think a lot of what we need, we already have. And that's just our basic common sense. So don't lose that in the process. Don't think that you have to do a 10-week training course to be an effective organizer. You just have to bring your common sense and your understanding of mutual respect and communication to the table and start there.
All right, very good. Jamar, your thoughts?
Sure. And I want folks to take some time to look at our website. So it's repower.org. So take some time to look at the trainings that are available. We have moved to a digital space. So you can do it right from home or from your phone, your laptop, your iPad, tablet, whatever you use. And so we have those trainings going on pretty much every day. We have different trainings that are happening. And then we're doing a lot of trainings now in partnership with a lot of different community and issue-based organizations. And so also be on the lookout on the website for our partnership opportunities. Because many of the issues that you may be concerned about, we're actually curating a lot of the trainings with some of those issues. And so that's something that's going to be very important in this work. But one of the things that I will highlight above all the tactics and everything that we've provided everyone today is your community is as strong as the advocates you help to build in your community, right? And that ultimately everything should be rooted in the community. And we have allowed for too long for things to be rooted in the system, around money and around power and around access for a few. And so lifting up the community will allow those doors to be open for everyone. But as we mentioned, make sure that, we're being strategic, make sure that we're being mindful, that we're being thoughtful of other people. And ultimately, at the end of the day, make sure that you're building relationships and you have key allies and co-conspirators. This is something that we're talking about this week, and we didn't talk about it much in this session, so I hope I'm not going too far off topic. But one of the questions that I've been getting since this is the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce is, how do white people get more involved? And I think we need to start having more of a conversation of not just getting involved, but actually making some kind of difference. And I posted on my personal Facebook page today that we don't need white people to save the Black community. We don't need them to come in and be heroes and sheroes. We need them to leverage their spheres of influence and power to change a system that has reinforced racism and bigotry and discrimination and injustice as to why we're here today. And so ultimately, we need people to be building relationships, and we need people to be co-conspirators with us in this work, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you can't expect Black and brown people to take down a system that they did not build. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to take all of us working together in different roles that's going to ultimately make a difference in our communities. And so that's something for me that I've been pushing. And then the other piece is making sure that you are researching and educating yourselves on the candidates that are running. I know, and those of you who are in South Carolina, you all have a primary that's coming up. So if you have not voted, please make sure that you go and vote. But ultimately, at the end of the day, please know who you're voting for. We can't just go on, I know you, I like you, that's my friend. You know, we can't do that anymore, you all. If we want change in our community, we got to be a little bit more strategic about who we're putting in office, because that changes how we talk to those people in office. And if we don't put the right people in office, everything we taught you today on this webinar and on this chat session almost will be null and void, because ultimately we won't have anybody to receive the information. And so that's a key piece that's, very important. Please research who you're voting for. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, if you know somebody who would be good for a leadership role that will fight for the community, recommend them to run for office. There are organizations like Emily's List and Emerge that train women who want to run for office. There's the Collective PAC that train Black people, and Higher Heights that trains Black women on how to run for office. Repower, as I mentioned, where I work, and we're figuring through conversations with those other organizations. But please make sure that people are getting the proper training and resources that they need so that there will be effective elected officials. And one of the things we're working on right now is a governance academy, because we talk about training people to organize their community and training people to run for office. We don't train people on what to do when they actually get in office. And so now a lot of organizations are doing trainings around governance, and we need to be pushing our elected officials to doing some of that work, because running for office and being in the community is different from sitting in the city council seat. And so we need to acknowledge that as a gap that a lot of organizations are working together to fill. And so I thank you, Marilyn, for having us. I could go on and on. I have about 25 things I could tell people to do. But
that's why I'm gonna bring y'all back. So I'm just gonna put this out here.
Okay.
So we might need, we kind of were talking about doing something. We might need to do this conversation at least once a month, where we just come and talk, because this is part of just educating folks. And I was actually with someone who said, with the Black community, they used to go and just talk. And I know Martin Luther King in the movement, they just used to have conversations, and people don't realize that they would sit and they would just talk and get it all out and learn and grow. But it was also part of developing the strategy.
Right.
Everybody
you have to develop the people to develop the strategy.
That's
and then the
right.
strategy lets you build power.
There
and it
you
all
go.
has to work together.
And yes, they had their meetings, but they also had times where they just broke bread together and they talked. And those are intellectual circles, and thank you, Brandon, those relationship buildings that we don't do anymore. So I'm putting this out here that we could do this in a public manner, and I think the three of us, we do have those kind of conversations off camera, obviously, whenever we could get together. But
y'all too big for me now. Y'all too big for me.
You need to stop. But I do want to put this out here. You guys look at your calendars, and if we just do this once a month and just come and talk, and anybody, if y'all want to shoot us a topic or anything you want us to talk about, we'll just come and talk and we'll answer your questions. And I'm just putting that out there, and it'll also help me fill out my content too, y'all. This is hard.
It's so much to talk about, and you have to organize it.
You have to organize it. But if you guys want us to do that, I'd love to hear from you. Drop that into the comments and everything.
Please.
And Brandon left us for a minute, and I was like, Brandon didn't tell me he had to leave early.
I don't know what happened.
But he popped on back in. See, y'all, we have good times and fun together too. You got to do
Yeah.
that. You
Oh
got to
yeah.
do it when you're out here
This
organizing
work
and
is very
everything.
hard, so you
It
do
is.
have to make sure. And I think we don't stress that part enough, Marilyn. I'm sorry
Yeah.
to cut you off,
No,
but
go ahead.
we don't stress the self care because self care is
Mhm.
self preservation. And
Mhm.
if we can't
Come
preserve
on.
ourselves as individuals, how are we going to be available for our community and be available for the movement? So what you bring is important. Sometimes we get on the phone and just laugh and act a fool, and that's
Mhm.
okay because this
Mhm.
work is very hard. It is gruesome. It is
Yeah.
challenging and taxing. And so make sure that you love on your family members, your friends, your neighbors, your community members, because we're going to need each other's strength to get through this. So you make a very good point that we don't really emphasize way back to the point in the conversation where we talked about mental health. It's surrounding yourself with good and positive people that can help uplift you too in the midst of this work. So sorry to
Yeah.
cut you off, but I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure I add that for
Oh,
people.
that's fine because that was actually much needed and everything, and that's a topic that they're popping in topics, y'all, in
Yeah.
their comments, so
Brittany
they
needs to
Good,
be
really
on a
want
good,
stuff.
roll. Thank
good.
you, Brittany.
I know Brittany's like on a roll there. So you're gonna have to go, Jamar. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up this show. But I promise everyone in our viewing audience, thank you for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. I know Jamar and Brandon do also,
Yeah.
and we promise you that we're gonna talk off camera and try to figure out what Sunday. I think Sunday's good for all three of us. That we want to come in and have this conversation at least once a month where we could just talk and folks you could throw us some questions and we'll just hopefully help our folks. Another way to help the community get organized.
Hmm.
Yeah, another way to get it. Any last thoughts, Jamar, before you have to pop out, and any last thoughts, Brandon? I'll let Jamar go first.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. And thank you, Marilyn. I want to uplift you because one of the things that's hard to do in a lot of this work is to create and leverage and maintain a platform for people to really ask these questions. Because a lot of times people don't know about, I'll tell somebody something, in the grocery store about politics. They're like, oh, I didn't even know that.
Mhm.
Right. But what spaces have we created to allow people to receive this kind of knowledge and to be able to ask these kind of questions like some people ask? I tried to follow the chat and listen and be a part of the
Mhm.
conversation, but
Mhm.
you know, uh, so thank you for your leadership in that work because a lot of people don't even know where to go to ask what city council does or how do I vote or how do I talk to my elected official. And so thank you to you personally, but also the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. I know you have a team of folks working with you and behind you to do that work. And to everyone who's watching, as again, this is our opportunity to build power. And one of the things I shared with someone on the telephone this morning was, you know, there's the saying, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than for permission. And at this point, we don't have time to ask for permission. We've got to fight for our communities because our lives are in danger. I mean, ultimately, that's the bottom line. And so everything that you can do in your community to make sure that we elevate Black Lives Matter, other than being Black votes and Black faces in courtrooms and boardrooms and hospital rooms and classrooms, it's going to ultimately be something that's very important. So thank y'all for tuning in and listening. I look forward, Marilyn, to coming back with you and Brandon. We can cut up in public now. And and I look forward to it. So thank you for having me, and I'll stay on for a couple more seconds as we wrap up.
Okay, Brandon, how about wrapping it up and then I'll close the show.
Okay, and I hope you share the Repower link again. I saw somebody put in the chat free power instead. I want
Okay,
to make
yeah.
sure.
Power ain't free.
Yeah, you got to take it.
I love the sentiment, but it ain't free. Okay, go ahead, Brandon.
And that's another show because I got some stuff going on with Santee Cooper, but that's another show. But go ahead,
Okay,
Brandon.
that's a part of the series.
I didn't see Brittany at that one, but put that as number 6, Brittany. But there's a saying that says if you want to run fast, run alone, but if you want to run far, run together. And
Mhm.
that's where we are right now. We can't look at this moment as a sprint. We got to look at it as a marathon. Continued pressure can turn, a grain of coal into a pure diamond. So we have to keep the pressure up. We have to continue to mold and shape each other. We got to continue to work together and work through these difficult times of coming together and creating this culture of organizing and understand that everyone's not going to know the answer. Folks don't know what they don't know until they know it. And the best
Hmm.
way for us to educate each other is to continue to have these conversations like we're having, like Marilyn talked about in the past, where our leadership used to just come together and break bread and have conversations because you never know what the next person doesn't know. So keep those conversations going. If you know someone who's out there leading the charge in these marches, protests, rallies, and so on, shoot them a text just to tell them you love them because you wouldn't imagine in some of these places across the country and right here in South Carolina how much hate mail these organizers are getting on a regular basis. So you just saying I love you, keep up the good work could uplift them and give them the energy they need to keep going. Marilyn, I love you and I thank you.
Thank you.
And just know I'm always praying for you and sending you positive energy. Jamar, I talk to you too much to say anything but I love you too and the work that you're doing. Keep it going, and I just pray that everything that we hope for come to pass, and everything we work for comes to fruition in our lifetime, and not hope us leaving this earth hoping that the next generation can reap the benefits of the blood, sweat, and tears that we sowed into America's soil. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. I want to remind everyone and also thank you for watching A Gathering Place where the change makers come in and we do exactly what we've been doing talk and break bread together. Well, not bread today, but you know what I mean. But
Soon.
anyway,
It's
Next
gonna
time, I'll bring my
honor
glass of wine. Next time.
BYOB. Thank you. All
you.
right. Nothing wrong with that. So we are here every Wednesday and Sunday at 4 o'clock. I want to thank Jamarr Brown for joining us today and Brandon Upson. You guys, we're gonna do this in the future. Stay tuned. I'm gonna talk to them off camera and we're gonna make this happen. But you guys, thanks for coming today. I really appreciate you. You know I love you too. Right? All right. So all right, staff. I say staff. My staff of me. All right. Enjoy the
Keep it
rest of your
existence,
weekend.
Marilyn.
I
Keep it
know,
into
right?
existence.
Everybody, enjoy the rest of your weekend and thank you for joining us today. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Good night,
Thank
y'all.
you.
Good night,
Bye,
Jamar.
everybody.
Good night, Brandon.
Bye bye.